Okay, my name is Tayo Kasai Alamu. I am a unique PhD fellow, just from Slovenia, University of Ljubljana. And my interview is from his Professor Yan from University of Hong Kong. And we are making this interview in the University of Aarhus on the unique conference entitled University's Future. I'll give really a few minutes, just a minute, for Professor Yan to tell us his research interest.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'm based in the University of Hong Kong, Faculty of Education. I'm a Professor Associate Dean there. Let me introduce very briefly my background. I think this is important when I express my views. I have been working in university environment for the past 3 decades, respectively 1 decade in China, 1 decade in Australia, and 1 decade in Hong Kong. So my research at the moment focuses mainly on higher education, comparative and international education, and education policy sociology.
Oh, thank you. So now we can start really our main questions, which is more academic. The first question is really, how do you see the current trend of higher education? What are the key trends that you observe?
Yeah, in my own research, I try to avoid the word trends, because when people use the word trends, they often imply something like, this will happen, definitely. And to some extent, people may think this is a correct direction. So I often try to avoid this word. So let me explain this. What is happening does not mean what should be happening. So what is happening, if you observe the whole world, I have to say the situations are very different. What's happening exactly in the European Union countries and very different from where I come from, in East Asia. But largely we can observe something in common, quite obvious impact of globalization, continuing huge impact and many aspects. Some are good and some are not so good. We have heard so much in the conference. Internationalization, part of this, building up education hubs, world-class universities, offshore programs, all this kind of thing. So impact of globalization continue. Some are good, some are bad. Another major thing is massification, so the rise of student numbers. And this has a number of significant implications for how we do things. And for example, quality, traditional students, population disappearing, shrinking, and we have very non-traditional, this kind of thing. Access, inequality, social justice, and particular access. It's interesting. On one hand, student population increasing dramatically. On the other hand, unequal access is very obvious, particularly in some societies. So that's a big issue. Another major thing is financing higher education, how we finance education. Again, this is very different. If you look at what's happening in the UK, if you look at what's happening in the United States and East Asia, where I come from, very different. But how to finance our universities is a major issue now. Academic profession is a big issue. Everywhere you go, almost everywhere you go, professors are under increasing pressure. They have to publish, otherwise they perish. We know the saying. And this has affected their morality, even, to be honest, even has affected their health, their family life. It's quite serious. Of course, a very differentiated situation. Younger people under even greater pressure without tenure. But we all know the story. So academic profession is an issue. And another thing I think many people keep talking is ICT, information communication technology in education, MOOCs, this kind of thing. These are all happening in our world. But I really want to emphasize in my eyes what should be happening. Not necessarily what is really happening or really happening well. That is, to me, that's a very different, my own perspective. To me, universities are cultural institutions. So universities themselves, they are very cultural, and they should pay so much, they should pay their core attention to cultural function. But if you look at how universities are operated, if you look at how we study our universities, we focus overwhelmingly on economic aspect and sometimes political aspect. We ignore very much cultural dimension. I think cultural dimension is the most important because for the first time in human history, we need to learn, different peoples need to learn to live together peacefully. And we haven't learned that very well. And we definitely need to learn that, I think, quite urgently. And I think that should be the fundamental function for universities. But if you look at many universities in the developed countries and in developing countries, no, in terms of this, not doing particularly well. That's my answer.
Okay, thank you. Then really related to this happening, just currently happening, which happenings are really the most challenging to higher education, and which happenings are really positive and should be really encouraged?
Okay, the most challenging, if you ask people, particularly those working in university, but not necessarily the best scholars in the field of higher education. You know, in higher education, we have many people working in, say, physics department, or administrators, or in sociology department. They would certainly say it's the financing. You know, the way universities are governed, the way universities are financed. It's hugely problematic in European unions, I think. It's also problematic in the States. It is getting more problematic in East Asia even. When I say even, because East Asian governments are investing heavily in higher education. But they invest on one hand, they also push you very hard. They push you to work hard. And in order to push you to work hard, they use a lot neoliberal approaches. And that has given us a lot of hard time, we all know. So that's very challenging. What people fail to see clearly is the unfair system, global system. I think global system is not fair. Is culturally biased and politically unfair, the global system. And that global system very much reflected in our university system, in global university system. So the relationship between different higher education systems, between different institutions, very much unequal. And therefore the knowledge relationship between different knowledges, very much unequal. Therefore it's a huge issue. I usually put it this way. This is fundamentally the reason why universities in developing countries, which are usually non-Western countries, universities are not so efficient, because what you learn formally is actually Western knowledge mainly. What you should have is to apply this knowledge very well in your own society. That's a huge challenge. Most people cannot. So there is a mismatch there, and that mismatch has been the result of historical facts. So it's not easy to tackle, and it's still there, and often very much ignored by people, by policymakers in developed countries and in developing countries. Also very much ignored by scholars themselves. I think that's the very urgent issue. That's something we need to do. We need to work hard, and particularly those from periphery countries. I think we need to be aware. I need to say I'm not negating the importance of Western knowledge, which is already part of the global knowledge system. But I think we need to respect, we need to understand other local knowledges, and then we need to put them together nicely. And that's a huge task. That's a huge job. And by far, no society has really found out ways to do this. That's why I say universities are not very efficient in non-Western world. They are much more efficient in European unions and particularly in North America. Because when their university operate, they have their own culture values support them. But when the same, Western model universities, which we use all over the world, Western model universities operate in, say, your country or even in China, these universities, to operate well, they have to have appropriate cultural values support that operation. But that kind of cultural values, academic freedom, for example, institutional autonomy, for example, that kind of cultural values are very often absent in those cultures. So it is very difficult for these societies to operate Western model university. Therefore, leads to this kind of what I call inefficacy, low efficiency.
And the second one, just related to this, which part of these trends and happenings are really positive? Which part you see as positive change of higher education, and therefore we can just applaud and push further?
Yeah. This is very much related to what I'm doing now. For a long time, I have been writing about Chinese universities mainly, but increasingly I'm looking at other East Asian societies. I have always criticized strongly Chinese universities. In fact, if you look at my publication, I criticize more than many Western researchers, including Philip Oderbach and Sam Marginson. And a few years ago, I got a major project from Hong Kong government looking at the East Asian Flagship Universities. And why I want to explain this, because national flagships are very different from lower tier universities. I have to explain. So I'm a little bit more biased towards these flagship universities. But because I'm looking at the trends, the positive part, the hope, hopefully the hope, so I'm looking at the best universities. And after 3 years, including many empirical data, field work, I focus very much on academic elites and institutional leaders. I have to say, I become much more optimistic. I actually need more time to explain this. Let me say, the East Asian flagship universities have clearly shown what I call turning scars into stars. Because East Asia, as you know, in history, the culture, culturally, although some countries politically not colonized, but culturally, all of them, culturally and educationally, all of them were colonized. And they were suffering from that kind of cultural embarrassment, and humiliation. And they're still blind, to a great extent, they're still very much blindly admire Western culture. But after nearly 2 centuries, this kind of hard experience, when I say hard experience, feel emotionally pretty hard, but on the other hand, they learn Western knowledge really, really hard. They really try their best to learn Western knowledge. After nearly 2 centuries, their learning of Western knowledge has achieved a fairly high level. And then if you look at East Asian universities, the flagship universities, they are as good as some major university in Europe and North America at the moment. They are just as good. Once they achieve this level, I'm very happy, and I was very happy, but I was also to some extent surprised to see when I talked to the institutional leaders in East Asia Flagship Universities have shown great confidence. And they say, on one hand, we learn Western knowledge without any reservation, or almost, On the other hand, they say, we don't want to throw away our tradition. I think they have shown, let me put it simply, they have shown clear signs of integration of these two cultures. You know why I emphasize this so much? Because if you look at European major universities, my job is not to criticize European universities, but the reality is, if you look at a major European university, if you look at a major American university, let's say best university we respect very much, Harvard or Princeton. And this university, when they operate, there is only one culture there, that is the so-called Western culture. If you look at my university, University of Hong Kong, or National Taiwan University, or National University of Singapore, it's clearly at different levels, but all the time, individual level, institutional level, university level, and the system knowledge level, it's always at least two cultures, what I call biculturality, or even more than two in Singaporean case. So multicultural even, but let me just say biculturality. And they know their own society very well, their own tradition very well. They actually digest Western knowledge extremely well. So they can easily dialogue with the Western powers. At the same time, they have their own, and that part is their strength. And I think from a civilizational dialogue perspective, I think this is a wonderful experiment for human society. I personally place a lot of hope on this. I think that's exciting to observe. I'm not 100% sure this will happen, and many other lower tier universities will follow, but I think this is an extremely hopeful sign.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Do you think that they can really move on equal basis, and therefore benefits the society?
Yeah, good question. For a long time, I don't think East Asian universities were treated equally or the same as their Western counterparts. But if you look at the power structure today, it's changing every moment. But if you look at East Asia's development, I have to say the university development is a part of the rise of Asia. You can't separate, particularly because of the economic development. And I think they are getting more and more equal with major Western universities, and they are very, very confident.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let me really jump to the last and third question. In the higher education environment, we see some universities are central and others are peripheries. Yeah. Not on geographical issue, but on academic performance. And more universities in the Western world are considered as central universities, and the rest as peripheries. So, and one of the global happening that's taking place, to use your own word, or trend in general sense, is internationalization. Yeah. So, from a periphery perspective, what are really the major challenges of internationalization, if you consider that there are challenges?
Yeah, great, good question. Something I have been struggling with for decades. Let me say, maybe tomorrow I will talk more about this. Internationalization is a term defined usually by, you mentioned those in the center. Understandably, I understand those. I know those people well. I respect them. I know them personally. We have been friends. Gen I's definition, for example, widely adopted. People all use this To me, that definition is hugely problematic. It is useful at the institutional level. It's not useful at the system level. It's not useful at the individual level. It's only useful at the institutional level. But it's only useful at the institutional level in Western societies. And put simply, let's say internationalization means to integrate, to incorporate global perspective or intercultural perspective into your teaching, learning, and research. You mentioned, for those periphery countries, for those non-Western countries, the situation is much more complicated because non-Western countries really need Western knowledge. But Western knowledge, the fact is not they do not have Western knowledge or Western values. They actually was imposed. They were imposed Western values many years ago already. Their problem is not to have this, to incorporate the Western value. Their problem is to integrate the imposed Western value and the value they inherit from their ancestor and put them together. For a long time, let me put this, for a long time, internationalization is not a happy experience. It's actually a painful experience. The Chinese is a typical case. You know, and these Western ideas were imposed to them, and they were forced to believe this is perfect, this is beautiful, this can cure all our disease, and cause a lot of trouble. And they lost their identity. They cannot use this theory, knowledge to guide their life and their work. It's a very different story in the West. I just mentioned it because even you go to Harvard, you know, the Chinese knowledge about China only exists in museums and books and East Asia Studies. There's a faculty department. It's not incorporated everywhere in the daily operation of the university. You see what I mean? So their life, in their daily life, non-Western cultures, I should use a plural form, do not exist. So I think for the internationalization, different countries have very different targets, have very different priorities. For non-Western countries, it's really, really difficult, but they have to put them together, build up their own identity. That's extremely difficult. For non-Western countries, for Western countries, it's also it's not really difficult, but they really need to realize they need to learn from other countries. And by far, it's actually all on lips, not really in reality. I think that's the biggest challenge. You know, we have so much talk about internationalizing, we have very little real things in real life. I may too critical, but that's really based on my thinking, observation for a long time.
Thank you, really. Do you have anything to say? Just a few words outside just or related to that?
I think this is a wonderful project. Seriously, I think it's a wonderful project. We focus on not only the economic side, we really emphasize knowledge economy, but we also emphasize, as our interview shows, the cultural aspect. And we not only look at those in the center, I think we also look at those in the periphery. I think it is a high time for us to sit together and to figure out the future, because the future does not belong to one, the future belongs to both. If I'm suffering, you will never always enjoy. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Yan.
Thank you.
I thank you in my name, in the name of UNIC project, and the European Commission, who has really made possible all this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.